So much of the good stuff happens in the mistakes or in that. So if you're calling cut, you're sort of censoring yourself. Unless there was a terrible, you're going to die or something. You primarily don't ever, you let the director call cut.
Some names in Hollywood stand quietly yet powerfully above the noise, and Nicole Kidman is undeniably one of them. An actor of poise, range, and longevity, she's navigated a career that spans decades, genres, continents, and controversies. Her screen presence is often described as magnetic, icy, and vulnerable, and transformative, and her ability to disappear into roles has made her one of the most respected performers of her generation. But the polished images we see on the screen rarely hint at what lies behind them. What tensions simmer during rehearsals? What discomforts go unspoken on set? What relationships quietly break down under the pressure of long shoots, clashing egos, or creative differences? In today's episode, we're taking a closer look at the 5 professional relationships that Nicole Kidman has found the most difficult throughout her career. We're not here for gossip. We're here to explore the truth behind tough collaborations and what they reveal about the cost of staying authentic in a world that thrives on performance. The story of Nicole Kidman during her years with Tom Cruise is less about celebrity gossip and more about the shaping of a career under an unforgiving spotlight. At a time when Hollywood was still deeply attached to its male leads, Kidman entered the global stage not as a solo act, but as a figure often positioned in relation to someone else's orbit. The chemistry they shared on screen was unmistakable, but that chemistry came with a cost, one that affected how she was perceived and, more crucially, how she saw herself. Their most intense collaboration, Eyes Wide Shut, wasn't just another film. Stanley Kubrick's last project became a crucible for their personal and professional lives. The director's reputation for emotional precision and control collided with a real-life couple trying to keep their footing. It wasn't simply a shoot, it was a psychological marathon. What the audience saw on screen wasn't just performance. It was a mirror of something lived in and difficult to separate from real emotion. Long, disorienting shoots meant Kidman was required to stay in character for extended periods, often in emotionally vulnerable states. Reports from the set described an atmosphere of constant tension. Kubrick was known to isolate actors to preserve realism, and in doing so, blurred the boundaries between art and manipulation. For Kidman, the effect was lasting. Though she remained composed in interviews, small admissions suggested that this was not merely a professional challenge, but a personal upheaval. Her reflection on being the kid who followed wasn't casual. It was an acknowledgement of a chapter in her life where her voice was present, but often softened by someone else's echo. At that point, she was still seen by many as Cruise's wife, a label that both elevated her profile and restrained it. While she appeared on red carpets, spoke at press events, and continued to act in high-profile films, there was a quiet sense that her full range had yet to be recognized. The intensity of their shared work, the invasive nature of public attention, and the pressure of maintaining an image all fed into a kind of professional stasis. Yet Kidman's experience during those years became foundational. It wasn't a peak, it was a proving ground. The trials of that time, on camera and off, left imprints that would later be reshaped into creative control, award-winning performances, and a deeper autonomy over her career. The person who emerged post-cruise wasn't trying to step out of a shadow. She was walking forward with a new kind of clarity. Her silence on the more difficult aspects of that period doesn't come from denial. It speaks to strength, and perhaps to a deeper belief that her work, in time, would speak louder than any headline. Nicole Kidman's journey through the film industry is marked by moments of artistic triumph, but also by deeply formative experiences that came at a cost. The impact of her brief collaboration with Alec Baldwin in Malice and her later work under the direction of Lars von Trier in Dogville reveals how much emotional labor often goes unseen in performances that are later praised or forgotten. These moments were not headline-making controversies, but internal shifts, the kind that change an actor's posture toward their craft, and ultimately toward their sense of self. On the surface, Malice may appear as just another early 90s thriller. It had all the markers of a mid-budget studio film, recognizable names, a tension-driven script, and a standard release that faded as quickly as it arrived. But on set, Kidman was still in the early stages of navigating what it meant to assert herself in a male-dominated environment. Alec Baldwin, already an established figure, brought with him a specific type of energy that didn't always leave space for subtlety or compromise. Years after the project, Kidman was asked about her early film roles. Most she discussed with light commentary, but when the conversation moved toward the dynamics of difficult sets, her tone shifted. She didn't call out Baldwin directly, but she made a pointed remark about working in environments filled with tension. That choice of words lingered. People familiar with the industry connected the dots. There were already quiet discussions within the crew about disagreements on tone, pace, and control. Baldwin had a presence that could dominate a room, which, depending on the situation, could elevate a scene or suppress it. For Kidman, that set was an early and critical encounter with the reality of professional imbalance. She was expected to hold her own without the privilege of status, learning quickly that setting personal limits was not a sign of weakness, but a necessity. He didn't leave Malice with stories of dramatic confrontation, but she carried away something more useful, an understanding of how to protect herself in spaces where not everyone was interested in collaboration. It was a lesson that would inform the choices she made from that point forward, especially about who she would work with and under what conditions. A decade later, Kidman would find herself at a creative crossroads. After years of commercial success, she began choosing roles that challenged expectations. This brought her into the orbit of Lars von Trier. The director was infamous for his unconventional approach, but Dogville promised something different. A project that stripped away the aesthetics of cinema to focus entirely on the psychology of its characters. There would be no traditional set, only outlines on a soundstage. No grand visuals to distract from what the actors were going through internally. And at the center of this raw experiment was Kidman. The experience of filming Dogville has remained a rarely revisited topic in her career. She has acknowledged the power of the film and what it demanded of her, but her reflections are always restrained. What became clear, however, was that von Trier's methods had lasting emotional consequences. His style often involves pushing actors to uncomfortable extremes in the pursuit of authenticity. On a set like that, there is little protection for personal space. The work consumes everything. Kidman delivered a performance that was widely acclaimed, but the cost of reaching that depth is something she has never tried to hide. In interviews that followed the release, her words were measured but honest. She didn't express regret, but she also didn't express any eagerness to repeat the process. Her physical reactions, the hesitations, the brief closing off of posture, told their own story. When asked whether she would work with von Trier again, her answer was a quiet refusal disguised as diplomacy. "Once was enough," she said. There was no resentment in her voice, only the fatigue of having walked through something that altered her. The comment didn't need embellishment. The silence after spoke louder. What connects both experiences is not just discomfort, but transformation. These weren't just films that tested her skill. They tested her resilience. The power dynamics on set with Baldwin and the psychological toll under von Trier were vastly different, yet both required her to find an inner compass. Not to fight or argue her way through the situation, but to understand what kind of actor she was willing to be and what kind of environments she would and wouldn't tolerate moving forward. Kidman's approach to acting has become more selective over the years, not because she seeks safety, but because she has earned the right to choose projects that respect the totality of what she brings to the screen. When she enters a role now, it's with a fuller understanding of what the work demands and what she will demand in return. These early and mid-career challenges didn't break her. They sharpened her. The lessons didn't need to be spoken publicly. They were etched into the arc of her career. Even the absence of explicit criticism is telling. Kidman has never tried to rewrite her history. She speaks with respect for those she's worked with, even if the work itself was painful. That kind of professionalism is often misunderstood. It's not passivity. It's a form of control, a way of owning the narrative without letting it define her. Through the quiet aftermath of Malice and the emotional fog that followed Dogville, Nicole Kidman emerged not just as a performer, but as a professional with clarity. These were not the loudest moments in her career, but they were some of the most revealing. They showed how artistry often comes at a price, and how that price shapes not just the roles an actor takes, but the kind of person they become in the process. Nicole Kidman's career is filled with roles that require discipline, depth, and emotional range. She has worked across genres and decades, adapting her methods to the needs of the story, the vision of the director, and the energy of her co-stars. But some collaborations, even when full of potential, never quite materialized as expected. The unspoken story behind her near partnership with Robert Downey Jr. is one such example. It never reached the screen, yet it left behind echoes of tension that offered a rare glimpse into how contrasting artistic methods can dismantle even the most promising of ventures. The film was never officially announced, but it had quietly been in development during a time when both Kidman and Downey were in significant transitions in their careers. Kidman was deepening her reputation as a dramatic powerhouse, and Downey, though still regaining stability in the industry, remained undeniably magnetic. The pairing looked ideal for a character-driven drama. Rehearsals reportedly began with enthusiasm, and those in the room commented on the undeniable energy that sparked between them during early read-throughs. But that spark did not evolve into trust. Robert Downey Jr.'s style has always leaned toward instinct. He favors movement, surprise, and in-the-moment reactions. Improvisation is not just a technique for him. It's a language. Nicole Kidman, by contrast, approaches the work with intense preparation. Her process is rooted in building a foundation that allows her to sustain performance through emotional layering, physical discipline, and script fidelity. It's not rigidity. It's structure that holds the emotional weight of her characters. When the rehearsals moved into more complex emotional territory, the clash became difficult to ignore. Downey's unpredictability was meant to bring spontaneity, but for Kidman, it created instability in scenes that required a shared rhythm. She relied on cues and timing. He dismantled them. To observers, it wasn't conflict in the personal sense, but artistic friction that couldn't be reconciled. Kidman was described as focused and reserved during these sessions, while Downey was more animated, often experimenting beyond the script's frame. Both actors are known for their commitment, but commitment doesn't always mean cohesion. Despite their shared respect for craft, they were simply operating in two different systems. No public fallout followed, no interviews aired grievances. But when the project quietly fell apart, there was no push to revive it with the same leads. In later years, Kidman made a subtle comment when asked about actors who were difficult to calibrate with. Sometimes talent doesn't mean compatibility. Sometimes it's just noise. She never clarified whom she was referring to, but the tone suggested something remembered. This incident remains one of those rare behind-the-scenes moments where process, not personality, determined the outcome. It showed that even seasoned professionals can find themselves at odds when the language of their performance styles fails to align. Years later, Kidman would share the screen with another actor widely regarded as one of the greatest, Meryl Streep. Their scenes together in Big Little Lies Season 2 drew immediate acclaim. Every exchange between Celeste and Mary Louise was a study in control and confrontation. The emotional force of those scenes was undeniable. Viewers expected brilliance, and they received it. But off-camera, there was little camaraderie. This surprised many who assumed that two actors of such caliber would naturally gravitate toward each other. But what unfolded was a different kind of collaboration, one built on mutual respect, not personal connection. The set was described as quiet, focused, almost clinical in its professionalism. They rehearsed with precision, performed without disruption, and maintained distance. There was no tension, no coldness, just a lack of emotional familiarity. Streep is known for her chameleon-like abilities and immersive technique. Kidman, equally serious about her craft, approaches characters with psychological realism and internalized emotion. In many ways, they share similar values, but that does not guarantee interpersonal closeness. One crew member observed that while other cast members spent time bonding between scenes, Streep and Kidman largely kept to themselves. They weren't unfriendly. They were simply centered on the work. What this dynamic reveals is a truth rarely acknowledged in the public imagination of Hollywood. Chemistry on screen doesn't always stem from connection off-screen. Sometimes the best performances are born not out of friendship, but from distance. A space where each actor brings their entire world to the table, sets it down, and lets the scene do the talking. Kidman has never suggested anything less than full admiration for Streep. Her interviews have always reflected deep respect. But what she doesn't offer is the kind of glowing, personal anecdotes reserved for co-stars she's bonded with more closely. The silence on that front speaks to the professional boundaries that govern their work together. There's value in understanding this kind of artistic distance. Not every collaboration has to be intimate. For Kidman, whose career has been marked by emotional precision and careful intention, being effective does not require emotional accessibility outside of the frame. In fact, part of what sustains her over decades of intense roles may be this very ability to compartmentalize. Whether it's a rehearsal room that collapses under the weight of two clashing methods, or a set where two masters work in orbit without ever touching, these moments are not failures. They're realities of a profession that demands both individuality and cohesion. Sometimes they meet. Sometimes they don't. The result, however, is often the same. A piece of work that stands apart from its process, shaped quietly by all that never needed to be spoken aloud. Nicole Kidman isn't known for airing grievances or engaging in industry drama. And perhaps that's exactly why moments of tension, conflict, or creative struggle in her career stand out all the more. These aren't stories of hatred in the dramatic sense. They're stories of friction, pressure, and the deeply human complications that come with trying to create something meaningful while under the spotlight. For over 4 decades, Kidman has chosen roles that stretch her limits, sometimes emotionally, sometimes physically, often both. And in doing so, she's crossed paths with some of the most intense, visionary, and difficult personalities in the business. These moments didn't define her, but they shaped her, sharpened her sense of self, solidified her voice, and carved out a space where she could work on her own terms. That's what makes Nicole Kidman such a compelling figure. Not just the performances, but the discipline and grace behind them. If you found this breakdown insightful, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever rewatched one of her films differently after learning what went on behind the scenes? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And stay tuned for more honest, deep dives into the untold stories behind cinema's most unforgettable names.